Coffee-stained notes here. I was like making notes while I was doing this today and in the process of prepping all the breads. And so you have both been to classes here and you're familiar with our vision and our what we want to provide our community. So I don't feel like I have to really go into that as much tonight. But I guess what I want to know from you ladies is how many of you bake bread already? Do you bake bread?
No.
Not yet. Okay. That's okay. That's absolutely okay.
I mean, like banana bread. And
hey, yeah. That's fine. Hey, that's a bread. Yeah. Cool. Well, you're jumping in like hands-on into a traditional bread. That's awesome. Okay. Cool. And you have baked bread before?
I have.
Okay.
I've loved cooking and baking since I'm a kid. Okay. I took every home ec class I could get in high school. I just loved it. And I tried to do sourdough a couple of times. And the results are, and like you said, I just feel like I wouldn't be in the presence of somebody who has this knowledge and figure it out. So I'm excited.
I bought a bag of fine corn flour.
Yeah.
But I'm like,
okay.
And I bought a book, and but I'm like, okay, what do I do with this?
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay. So you bought a book on bread making.
Yes. Yeah.
Bread making or sourdough?
No, it's the einkorn flour.
Oh, yes.
book.
Those are on my wish list.
And I'm like, I don't know what to do with this.
Okay.
So I'm going to wait until after class to figure it out.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm not an expert at this. I have seriously been learning and trying to learn sourdough for the last, I would say 3 to 4 years, maybe even more than that. Well, Kristen O'Reilly, you know Kristen. Do you know Kristen O'Reilly? Yeah. We met in a Walmart parking lot. She gave me sourdough starter and I gave her kefir grains. We met on Facebook.
I just met her today.
Did you meet her? Okay.
The grains from her.
No way.
Yes.
So you're getting the great great grandmother of the grains. I love it.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. Yes. And so we met, and it was just this crunchy meetup where we just exchanged sourdough for, kefir grains, and I tried and I killed that starter, and she had given me the traditional starter, the rye starter. That is a traditional sourdough starter. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I was trying, and I would say that was longer. That was 5 years ago, because that was before she was even in oils, way before that. And I had friends that gave me recipes that you have to measure this, weigh this, and I'm like, this is way too complicated. I have little ones at home. I don't have time to do all this measuring. I'm not used to measuring. I mean, weighing things with a scale is the traditional way that bakers definitely bake. It's the more traditional. But we don't do that, right? I mean, maybe if you're European, you do that, or if you are a baker. But my cousin, who is he went to school for pastry chef, to be a pastry chef. He loves bread. That is his love. And so he he got a recipe for me and he gave it to me in measurements. And I don't even measure anymore, really. I just kind of throw it in a bowl. And you think about, like, I don't know, in biblical times, did they really have measuring cups? Did they? I mean, they had scales, but you really go by the feel of the dough. And I feel like we make it more complicated than it needs to be. So we're going to dive in so that you guys can get started, and then we'll talk about the flours and the different kind of techniques. So we're not going to go through this like step by step like you're doing this at home. This is going to kind of be pieced together in all different kinds of ways, because I don't want to keep you here for 6 hours, right? Or like 3. I mean, we're going to be here for about 3 hours, but really it's a larger window of time. It's about 6 hours, 4 to 6 hours. So you have your bowl. So let's get your bowls out. And then we'll taste the bread. You guys can get some food after we make everything. I love it. Yay! I have a bunch of them over there. We are, seriously, this year we are just making all of our Christmas gifts, and that's one of them. So when I start, I always start with my bowl. So get your bowl in front of you. And I have your sourdough baby starters down there. I divided them all up. I had this big old pickle jar like full of sourdough starter the entire week, and I was feeding it and feeding it and feeding it massive quantities of rye. And I have just enough rye. I called the health food store and I asked for 10 pounds to be ground fresh. And I got there and she's like, I had just under 5. And I'm going, okay, Lord, let's multiply these loaves. Like, we can do this. And I just had just enough. So these are your babies. See, they're all bubbly.
They look great.
Yes. And you'll find that, let me show you mine real quick. Okay, so mine is, I don't know, I left this for you just to show you what happens. Sometimes it bubbles over and like you'll wake up the next morning, depending on when you feed it, and it'll bubble over and get all gnarly and like just gross. And then you just have to like, it's just like, kind of like a diaper. You just have to like constantly change it and change out the container. And, but I just find, I don't know, for me, I'm just like, I love that. I just feel like there's just something rustic about the bubbling over and just, yeah. And this, like, oh, I don't know, it's growing, and they're living microorganisms that sourdough has in it. And you'll see mine is definitely a lot more bubblier than yours. So as you continue to feed it, you will see like your bubbles will get like so much bigger. And if you leave more room in here too, it's just gonna like get bigger and airier and just more beautiful. And the thing to do is really catch it on that beautiful big bubble, okay? And that's a little bit of an art. And sometimes it's not like, sometimes it's like, okay, we have to catch it when that sourdough's ready, when that starter's ready, rather than, you know, when we are like, oh, now I can get to my bread making, you know, if you want that good rise. So all of this, though, what my cousin was sharing with me, like all of this can be broken off and added back into the starter for flavor. So I'll show you. I'll just kind of lift mine off. See how like, but like all of this inside, it'll start to kind of get cakey on the outside. You can just scrape that and add it right back in for flavor. I don't know if you can smell it too. Go ahead and smell, like, it just has a really good sour, fermented smell to it.
Smells
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
When you have more of a newer starter, which you guys do, it's not going to be as of a pungent smell. And as this gets older and older, it's just going to get more of a powerful smell to it. Now, I do keep mine in the fridge so that I don't have to feed it every single day. If I did feed it every single day, if like I made bread every single day, it would definitely have more of a powerful smell to it. I feel like because you do a slower ferment in the fridge, it's not as like powerful.
How
Does that
long
make
does
sense?
it take in the fridge?
So a week. So if you keep it in the fridge for a week, so Saturday you feed it, like on the weekend you make your bread, you feed it, you throw it in the fridge, and we'll talk about this then. And then next Saturday, you just feed it, let it go for a day, and then you can make your bread, feed it again, throw it in the fridge, and we'll go back over this. So a good week. I wouldn't let it go longer than that. Now, if you keep it on your counter, you're gonna have to feed it every single day with more flour and more water to keep it going, to keep it alive, because it is a living organism. Just like, have you fermented anything?
Kombucha.
Yep. Yeah. And so you have to keep those things alive on your counter. Yeah. And so the same thing with sourdough. It's just we're using the natural wild yeasts from the air and the bacteria from the air that are creating that natural rise in that bread instead of using yeast. Okay. And it gives it really good flavor in your bread. Now, the loaf bread is really the only thing I make with sourdough. You can make English muffins, you can make pizza, you can make loaf bread. We don't eat a whole lot of bread, so this is kind of our treat throughout the week if I make soup, especially in the wintertime. In the summertime, not so much. I might bake a little bit, but it's really hot in our house. But I love it with, a slab of tomato and some pesto and some mozzarella cheese. So that's a really good lunch in the summertime, but in the wintertime, we tend to eat it a little bit more. I bake more, and it's really good with soup. So it's kind of like our treat, maybe once a week we'll have a loaf of bread. But I don't really delve into anything more than that just because we don't eat a whole lot of bread products, So you ready? Yay! Ready it's gonna all be, right? Okay, so we're gonna get messy. Our hands are gonna get dirty. But you know where the bathroom is, okay? So this first step, you're really just gonna use your spoon, okay? So the first step is to prep your starter. So we have our starter, you have yours, so go ahead and grab it. And your recipe is here. So when I bake, I always bake a double loaf because you can just wrap that second loaf up and throw it in the freezer. The other thing I love to do is if I have extra, I will cut it in pieces and I'll make croutons. I'll just throw some butter in a skillet with some garlic powder, some salt, some pepper, and I'll just toss it up and it'll kind of warm that bread up. So yeah, that's a good way to use up any bread that's maybe 2 days old because it doesn't stay soft like the store-bought stuff, right? You might need a chainsaw to get through it, but usually we'll get I'll get his muscle power and cut up or just break it off and throw it in a pan, and then it's really good on soup or on salad or something like that. So we're gonna make a single loaf tonight. So your recipe is right here. So you're gonna take 1 1/4 cups of starter. So I'm gonna grab my starter here. So take off your muslin top. Yep. Oh, look at it all bubbling up. Looking good. And honestly, I don't measure. Once you get really good with this, you'll be able to eyeball it about how much it looks like on the bottom of your, and it doesn't have to be perfect, right? But I'm gonna measure just to help you guys. It's nice and thick. That's what you want. See? It's beautiful. So 1 1/4. Actually, is there a spoon? Can I borrow your spoon for a second? Thank you. I'll give it back, I promise. And then, okay, I will use the 1/4 cup. Guys, I don't measure. Seriously. Okay. All right, so see that? See how thick that is? I have used other starters. I've tried an einkorn starter. A lot of times when you see these beautiful loaves of bread, or if you watch YouTube videos and you see these bakers that are just their dough is just like falling out of their bowl, and they're able to touch it and it's like bouncing. And like, did you ever like see YouTube videos, or did you ever watch any of those? And it's like, how is it not sticking to their hands? How is this not possible? I think they're using a white flour starter. You can use white flour starter. You can make any kind of starter you want. Rye is the traditional starter. It just gives it a really good flavor, and you want it thick. So when I was practicing with einkorn, I had a rye starter, I had an einkorn starter, and I was like, which one do I like the best? The einkorn was really runny, whereas the rye was a nice thick starter, and that's kind of what you want. And so then from there, you have your starter in here, and then you add your water to it. So I normally make a double loaf, so I have to follow the recipe here. So it's 3/4 cups of lukewarm water. So I'm gonna grab my water down here. Because we don't have a sink in here, I'm just gonna use some warm water from a wine jug. You know, it's all good. These come in handy, right? So lukewarm, I mean, not, you know, it's just, this actually might be too warm. So let me feel it. It's a little hot. It's just kind of like, you know, when you make pizza dough or something and your water's too hot and you add your yeast to it, it's going to kill yeast. So I think I'm going to go add some cool water to this. Okay.
Just trying to figure out when I'm gonna make my bread tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't start till like 11. I'm home till 10.
Okay.
I can make it in the morning, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you're going to work it tonight.
Yeah.
Put it in the proofing basket. And then what we do is, it's called a slow, I don't like the name of it, but it's called a retard rise. It's a slow rise. And so you're slowing down that ferment in the fridge. Okay. I mean, you could bake it right away tonight.
No.
But we'll talk about that, because it's,
Yeah.
I love to keep it in the fridge because it keeps that shape. It's easier to score it. And so really what I did today is there was a loaf that I made today. I mixed up some this morning. I was up at like 5:30 this morning. I mixed up my bread. And then I got home today after some meetings at like 12. I worked it, put it in the proofing baskets, and at 4 o'clock I baked it. So you could still do it within the day if you're up early and stuff. But usually I like to let it overnight, and you have a good 24 hours until you can bake it. So yeah. After that, it won't rise as much. You know. So now I have my 3/4 cups of water. I'm going to add it to my starter. And I usually do this with my hands, just to get the clumps out and to feel it. And I just do everything with my hands. But just to lessen the mess for tonight, we're just going to use a spoon. Okay. And this just kind of, I don't know, this is just the traditional, this is the way that I learned. I know some people just add their flour and their water all together, but this starts to activate that starter a little bit. And you can work out any of the clumps. And then you just let this sit for like 30 seconds to a minute or however long. I just go and do something else. Like I'll throw laundry in or whatever, you know, do some dishes. And then I come back to it. So not too long, but just let it start to like activate. It's going to heat up that starter because you have your lukewarm water. And I just let it sit for a little bit. All right. Let me just talk about, while this is sitting real quick, your muslin. Where is it? Okay. Some tools. I just go to Goods and get some fabric. Any fabric market, I'll just get some linen, and I cut pieces of it off, and I have it in like, I don't know, I just keep it in my drawer, like my pantry drawers, kitchen drawers. And I just use that to cover my sourdough starter. So I have a bunch of them always ready to go. And then they rinse off. Oh, look, here he comes. Little Toby cat. Hi, buddy. He's trying to climb up my apron today.
So cute.
Yes.
You have to get him in the video.
I know. She did get a few. She did get a little bit.
Chilling on his little
But yeah, so this will, like, as it bubbles up and stuff, it'll start to create this like film on your muslin. And so I just kind of scrape that off and throw it back in, and then rinse this off and throw it in the washing machine. And then I have it again. So like I said, it's kind of like changing dirty diapers. Like you just throw it in, add a new one. So that's what you have a little piece on yours, but you can always go again and get some linen, or even those towels like you have, Sue, right there. Yeah. Any of those like white, towels, like tea towels, you can use those to cover too. I don't really use, like for kombucha and stuff, any of my ferments, I'll usually use like a coffee filter. But with this, because it does get cakey on the outside, you'll notice that this will stick, and I don't want paper stuck to my sourdough, if that makes sense. So I use the muslin. I do try to keep it away from anything that's musty, moldy, like in an old home. So I was using these for my kombucha and all my ferments, and what I was finding is they would get moldy because of the mold spores that could be on like any of my linens. And so just because of the mold spores that are in our old home. So I try to keep them separate from like any of my other like rags and stuff, if that makes sense, Okay, so that's like one tool. We'll talk about more tools. So now, he's gonna get my attention, right? so now, I am gonna have you guys do this, okay? So take your starter. I'm going to give you this one first.
Can I stand up?
Oh, absolutely. Stand up, do what you need to do. And it's okay if the table gets messy, we'll just wipe it all off, and we got Thieves Cleaner for that, right? Yeah. And if you want a spoon to scoop it out, if that's easier, you can use your spoon.
I'm scared.
Don't be scared. Seriously, I don't measure. You just you can dump it in.
Boop.
Yep. All right, so you have that going. So let that sit for a little bit. You can just put your spoon on the side, that's fine. From here, so now we kind of let it sit for a couple minutes. And so now I'm gonna show you how to use white flour for your bread.
Okay.
Because white flour gives you that elasticity, it has a higher gluten to it, just so that you can master the feel of sourdough. Because if you're starting to use, if you start out using like a whole grain, whether it's einkorn or spelt, or even just a combination of white and spelt, or white and einkorn, or a little bit of rye in there, it's going to be tricky. I'm just starting to get the feel for using einkorn. Now I'm going to use einkorn so that you can see the difference in texture, because it has a completely different texture. I can still get a good rise using Young Living's einkorn. I bake with Jovial. It has a really yellowy, buttery texture, but I find it has a more runny consistency in sourdough, whereas Young Living's einkorn is more of a whole grain einkorn, and it's really good for sourdough. So I'll show you using the einkorn, which is this here, Young Living's, and I should get my Jovial just to show you the comparison of the textures. It must just be a different variety that they grow, or where they grow it. A lot of times it's where they grow it too, and the variety. You guys are going to use white. I get King Arthur's white flour. You can find organic flours out there. I just have a harder time finding a good priced organic flour that fits in our budget. I like King Arthur's just because it's unbrominated. The bromine really affects our thyroid. Oh no.
She attacked my camera. That's funny.
Freeze cat. If he gets to be a little too obnoxious, we'll send him in with the girls. But
It's just a tiny little
I
cat.
know, and he's like
He's attacking my feet.
ferocious. But yeah, when you're adding any of those, any white flour really has a lot of conditioners, a lot of added things that we don't need, pesticides. There's even just soybean flour that's added to it. There could be, I think it's like fava bean flour, just to make it fluffier and whiter, and so it has more shelf life. So I'm going to show you using einkorn, and I'm going to follow the recipe because normally I'm doubling this. So 1 2/3 cup. Okay, so I'm gonna do 1. And again, this is always based on feel as well. So sometimes I will add a little bit more, okay? So 1 2/3 cups. So that would be, yeah, I see. All right. And I just mix it all by hand. Let me see. Just bringing it together. Just trying to climb the wall. And I am going to show you, like this is going to be, now Kate, you make bread. This is going to be like the wettest dough that you've ever worked with. I always thought when I was making sourdough, I'm like, you're just used to, like, I'm used to making pizza dough. I'm used to making a loaf bread, you know, where it balls up in my KitchenAid mixer, you know, with my dough hook, that it starts to come, you know, away from the sides, and creates that like ball of dough. That's what we're used to. Whereas when you are making bread, it really should be wet. It should not be that ball of like perfectly formed dough. You want it wet. And you'll see that some bakers, they call it the hydration. They want it as wet can be, which I feel like when it's really wet, it's hard to work with. Like this, to me, is way too wet. Like when I should be able to pull this off and it just like is sticky. So I'm gonna add some more. But then again, I mean, that's the difference. When you're working with einkorn or any kind of like spelt, whole wheat, not so much because whole wheat has a lot of gluten in it, but like spelt, any ancient grain, it doesn't have a whole lot of gluten in it. And so you have to work that gluten. You have to let it sit and soak up the water. You have to let it start to activate that gluten. So really, I'm gonna add some more, but I'm seeing it come together. And that's where you just have to get that feel for the dough. And I feel like you guys, when you're using white flour, you're gonna start to get that feel and you're gonna practice. Like, don't do this tonight and then wait a whole nother month to make sourdough. I'm gonna keep you guys accountable. Like, you have to, as much as you're like, oh, I can't get this is more of a pain, like, practice, like do it like on the weekends. And for me, this is a therapeutic thing. I just love being in my kitchen, putting my apron on, getting my big old crock that's like an antique and just using my hands. And for me, it's just like, okay, this is probably what my great grandmother did, you know? This is what my ancestors did. And getting in there and just listening to music and just being in my kitchen and letting all my other worries just go, you know? And this is more of a therapy. And so just treat it as that, you know? Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't go right, sometimes it comes down to, okay, what's happening in us? Are we trying to beat that bread? You know, like just really needing it? Like it's just not going. It's usually okay. We have to treat it as like one being. Like and I'll talk more about that, because when we start to see it break apart, a lot of times we just need to be treating it as like one fluid piece. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Okay. So I'm working this just because it's an einkorn. And so I see it's really sticky. So I'm gonna add some more. You could do half einkorn and half white flour as you're starting to transition. You don't have to do a full einkorn flour. So if you wanna experiment, you can do half and half. You can do, you know, a quarter einkorn and the rest white and just start to experiment. Okay. So I'm gonna, yeah, now it's come together. And so those measurements that I give you are rough measurements. I mean, they're pretty spot on, but again, it does come down to, you know, temperature in your house, humidity in your house. So in the summertime, your dough might work a little bit different than it does in the wintertime. And that's where it comes down to just being comfortable with knowing the dough and really experimenting with it. So this, to me, when I do this, It's like staying still. It's, you know, it's kind of sticky. It's not liquid. So I'm just gonna play around with it just a little bit. Just because it is einkorn, I'm just gonna let it activate a little bit. So the more that you need any kind of ancient grain, or like, I'm just gonna say einkorn, you're activating that gluten in it. Okay, so. I just kind of like dip my fingers in there, just like to get it all off. Okay. So now I'll take my tea towel and I will just cover it and I'll put it in a warm place, not super warm, because sourdough, you want it to ferment and rise at a slower temperature. So it'll be more like 68 degrees to 72 degrees. You don't want to put it like right by the wood stove. Unless it's really cold in your kitchen, maybe set it off to the side of the wood stove, or you know, maybe set it on your cooking stove. And if you have something going in your kitchen or soup on the stove or something where they're gonna get that, it's gonna get that warmer heat. Normally regular bread is like 80 degrees. You want it to proof and rise at 80 degrees. Sourdough is different. It's a slower rise because it's over a longer period of time. It's gonna be about 3 hours for this to rise. Okay. If you have time throughout the day, if you're home, I'm going to show you something else you can do in just a second with this dough. Like I would say every half hour, every 45 minutes, every hour, whenever you think about it, we'll do this next step. So I'm going to take mine. In the summertime, I just put it on the kitchen table and then it stays warm. But like in the wintertime, I will put it kind of not by the wood stove, but kind of off where it's a little bit warmer, because my house does get pretty chilly and drafty. Or I'll just put it on the stove if I have something going in the oven, you know, I'll just put it on my stove. So I'm gonna put it over here for now. Okay. So this is the jovial einkorn. So I showed you the Young Living einkorn, which is more of a whole grain. I get this at the health food store in Myerstown. So you're coming from Ole, you probably have Echo Hill, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So check with Echo Hill. They probably would get it.
They do have it.
Do they have it?
I have it in my kitchen cupboard right now. Not one that big.
Okay. Yeah, it does come in smaller. I just get the bigger one because this is what we bake with. I mean, all of our baking, we use jovial. When it comes to like bread or anything that I want more of a earthy, whole grain flavor, then I'll use Young Living's einkorn because it's a totally different texture. And so you know what this looks like then. So you can kind of see the comparison. So this is more of like a yellow,
Yeah.
like it's just, and maybe it's just ground finer. You know what I mean? It's really a lot lighter, lot fluffier. It gives a really good texture to any of your baked products. And I just use it one for one, you know, like I would for white flour. This is more, you can see the grain in there, more of a whole grain, thicker texture. So that's kind of a difference. So I feel like when I use it for sourdough, it just continues to get, it's just runny. It just doesn't ever form shape. And I'm always adding more, and it just soaks up the liquid and it's never really like forming anything. So I don't use it for bread. Now, some people do. Maybe I just haven't learned the trick yet, but that's just, so that's the jovial kind. All right, so the next step, you have your bread, or you have your dough, right?
Yes.
But now what do you do with this, right? So every time you take some off, you have to feed it again. You have to make more, okay? So now we're gonna feed it, and you're gonna take that home, and you can do one of two things. You can leave it on your counter, and then you can bake again tomorrow, or you can put it in your refrigerator, and maybe you're just gonna bake on the weekends. And so then you would pull it out, say, okay, well, I wanna mix up my dough on Saturday. You pull it out on Friday, and you feed it, okay? So when I do that, I always just take a little bit off, right? Because you got to make room in there. I find that having a smaller container gives it that bigger bubble. Because when I was making it in this big old jar, it was just like, you have to add a cup of flour to each cup of starter. So you're just adding and adding and adding lots of flour. And so when you have a smaller amount, I do 1 cup of flour to 1 cup of starter usually. So the more starter you have, the more flour and water you have to add because you're feeding it. So think about like, okay, as a tiny baby, you don't feed it a whole lot, right? But as your children grow, you feed it more and more and more until they're like raging teenagers and they're just eating tons. So think about this as like your raging teenager and you have to eat tons, to feed it tons and tons and tons of flour. Or this is just like your little tiny baby and it's manageable, okay, right? Am I still good with all of this? Awesome, okay. So here you have about a cup of starter in there, okay? And so we're just going to add more rye flour. And you're probably going to want to put it in the fridge until you can get some rye. I get this fresh ground at Mast. So you'd be close enough to Mast in Myerstown. Have you been there?
I've never been to Myerstown.
Oh, you are going to be in for an adventure. No.
501,
It's just 501.
Okay.
You can look it up online and you can MapQuest it.
Okay.
Yeah, because what you're going to find is your whole grain flours are going to go rancid a lot quicker. So they might last for 2 to 3 weeks. You can put them in the fridge. They'll last longer in the fridge. So I only get what I need made up. I'll get about 5 pounds and that'll last me for, a couple weeks. Whereas like white flour will last forever, I feel like.
How do you know if it's gone bad?
So you taste it or you can smell it. You can smell when it has like more like a rancid oil kind of smell, Taste it. It'll taste kind of like old. Or, when you've pulled out like olive oil, not really olive oil, but any kind of like cooking oil, it has that rancid smell to it. Flours have the same. Or sometimes I know with whole grains, I'll get those, what are they? They're like little worms. Do you ever get those? And they'll start to make webs in here and you'll see it and you'll see little pockets and little holes in your flour and you're like, man. So if you're not going to use it, keep it in the freezer or fridge to keep it fresher and so that you're not going to have any of those, even though rye or even einkorn. Like I don't usually have trouble with jovial einkorn, but Young Living einkorn will go rancid faster. So it's like, what's in here that's not in there, Yeah. Even though this is organic, I don't know. Yeah, white flour is good on the shelf. It has a good shelf life. Whereas whole grains, just keep them in the fridge if you don't use them as often. I feel like we use them pretty often, so I just keep them in my pantry. Because, that's a lot of money. That's valuable, these more expensive flours. You can put them on your garden. If they go rancid, you can throw them on your garden. They're high protein. They're really fine just to add nutrients to your garden. You could do crafts with your grandkids or whatever, make some paper mache or, I don't know, do something with it. Don't just throw it in the trash. Yeah. So.
At one time I made so much kombucha I had to make a hotel to put
Yes.
the babies in. And then I'm like, what am I going to do with all these? So I just fed my flour bed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put them in the compost. You can, those scobies, you can make crazy things out of.
Yeah.
People, like they're,
And then Frank comes home, he's like, what's in the flour bag? Just never mind. It's okay.
Science experiment, honey. Yeah. So the rye. So just get that fresh ground. If you can't, like I was at the grocery store today, like our, market, family-owned market. They have a whole bulk section and they had rye there. It wasn't organic. And I was questioning like the date on it because it just felt like the bag felt sticky. When you're like, when it's an older product on the shelf, the bag kind of feels sticky. I'm like, how old is this? Like the sticker didn't look fresh. I'm like, well, I think we're just going to pray that Jesus like multiplies the loaves and like just this will be enough. And I seriously was measuring it out tonight for 6 people and it was exactly 6 cups. I was like, okay, well, we have enough for tonight. So, because it's you two. So you're going to feed your starter. And so on your notes, it'll tell you feeding your starter. On the back sheet, feeding your starter. Okay. So if I am like, okay, I'm going to bake every single day and I'm going to keep this on the counter, you would feed it every single day. You do this whole process. You pour it in, make your dough, and then feed your starter. So you're taking off and you're adding. You're taking off and you're adding, right? I mean, you could literally get a bigger jar, keep it on your counter, and just keep adding and feeding it and feeding it and feeding it. For what purpose? I don't know. For me, that was just, I was building up my starter for you guys, right? So if you feed it tonight and you put it in the fridge, say next Friday you pull it out, you can just dump a little bit off, like in your compost bin or just in the trash, or just pour it down the drain because it's thin. And then you add to it and you feed it so that it starts to bubble up. It's just gonna start, like, the bacteria is gonna start to feed off of the sugars, those carbohydrates that are in there, and create that sour
So
smell.
We have a week that we're not gonna bake, we still take out.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah,
But not maybe the full.
right.
thing.
So if like, okay, this Friday comes up and I'm like, I am so busy this weekend, there is no way I am making sourdough. This is what I do in the summertime because I don't bake every weekend. There's no way I am baking this weekend. So I'll pull it out, dump a little bit off, add my 1 cup and my water, and then mix it up. I kind of let it out for maybe, I don't know, an hour or so just to start the bubble process and the fermenting process. And then I'll throw it in the fridge and it's good till next week. So just every week, you know. If you forget about it and it's been 2 weeks, it's still salvageable. It'll still be salvageable. You just might get this like dark black, like water scummy layer on the top. Pour it off, pour off the sourdough, and I would feed it and let it bubble really good on your counter. You might have to feed it again and just really baby it and just nurse it back to health. So now I like to use the 1/2 cup because it's just easier to get the flour in these. I get the wide mouth mason jars. It's just easier to get it in there. So it's 1 cup. Now this is where people measure, like I'm not measure, they'll weigh it. I don't weigh things. So I do 1 cup of rye starter to about 3/4 cups of water. I like a thicker rye starter than a thinner rye starter because my cousin gave me the recipe for 1 cup of rye to 1 cup of water. I like it a little bit thicker. So I'm just gonna do this for mine to show you. I should have changed out my jar. So remember, this is my 1/2 cup measuring cup. So that's 1 cup. And then again, like that lukewarm water. So 3/4 cups of water, warm water. And then I'm just gonna use I just love wooden spoons too. I don't know. Mix it up. Scrape all that stuff off the side. There is a name for that. I don't remember what it is, but it just adds flavor. Okay. And then I'm good to go. I'm gonna put this in the fridge, forget about it till next week, and then start the process over. As you can see, doesn't even fill up the jar, right? Mm-hmm. But as it starts to ferment and warm and sit on the counter, it's gonna start to bubble like yours did. And if you keep this going, so maybe you wanna bake on a Saturday, but you're like, I really want a good bubbly sourdough starter. You could pull it out on a Wednesday and you can just feed it every day. Like pour a little bit off, feed it. Next day, pour a little bit off, feed it. Really get it up and running and just bubbly and active.
And at that point, you would keep it out on the counter then when you feed it on a Wednesday?
Yep, feed it on a Wednesday, keep it on the counter just to get it really bubbly and active. I find that's when it really gets really active, when you keep it out a couple days. It still is good if you just pull it out on a Friday, feed it, and bake on a Saturday. You know. Sometimes people feed it twice a day. It's up to you. And it's good to try to catch it when the bubbles are really active, like we talked about a little bit earlier. Okay, so I'm gonna add this top on here. Where's my rubber band? There it is. That's my worst nightmare. I'm always like, where's my rubber band? Did it get stuck in the sourdough? Okay, so I'm gonna do this. So let me show you what you can do with your starter or your dough now. So from here, you can see that is my starter. It's like puffy and just, you'll start to see it rise. I did this at 2 o'clock? Yeah, or 3 o'clock. This is one from today. So what I do is I get my hands wet. Let's see if I can do this without making a mess. Oh, baby, I need a sink in here. It's like we're in this catch-22 of our 2020 vision is that barn is going to be started. Like, I'm speaking it, that it's going to be started. So it's like, do we put our effort into that, or do we continue to upgrade this space with new flooring and a new sink? It's like, it's just that space. So I wet my hands because I feel like it doesn't stick as much. And this is where I add my salt too. So after about an hour, I will take about half a teaspoon of real salt. It's a brand, real salt. Okay, maybe more than half a teaspoon. I just sprinkle a nice, generous bunch on top. Real salt I get it in bulk, but it's a brand and it has all the minerals that you need. It still has all the minerals incorporated. It's actual real salt. Like, you have to watch. Salt on the market there's so many different varieties. Celtic sea salt's really good. It has that gray color. Himalayan, I question companies. It's like, is it pink because they add dye to it? Or is it pink because it's mined, actually mined? So I trust real salt, the real salt company. So I have my hands wet, I sprinkled all the salt on, and I fold it. So you might want to get up and watch what I do now. See how it stretches? Nope, you're good. So I fold this way and I turn, and then I fold this way. See how the bounce in it? You don't get that with einkorn. You get it with the white flour. And I just keep folding it, and see how it just kind of stretches, and sometimes you'll see a little bubble or two in here. That's what you want. And it takes on a whole new texture and shape. So I just do that a couple times, right? See, there's a little bubble there. And kind of go around. There's one there. Yes, that's what you want. So I do that, cover it up again, and maybe in about another half hour, 45 minutes, I'll just come over to it and be like, oh, how you doing, baby? And I'll just, fold it again and talk to it real nice. And, it's just therapeutic when you have just a whole Saturday just to be in your kitchen and really take time. Sourdough for me is like a slow food, and we're all into the slow food, right? Like, just food that you've really taken time to prepare. You put your love and your energy into it, and then you just eat it and you savor it. It's not like bread that you buy at the store and you just cut it and you just gobble it down, it's just, you put your love into it. And so that's why for us, it's more of a treat, because we know the time that we put into it. And it's not something that we just, I lie. I seriously eat a whole loaf of bread at dinner probably, because with 5 of us, it's we love chunky pieces of bread with lots of butter on. So yeah, we'll eat a loaf, but it's once a week, right? Not every night. Whereas growing up in the traditional Pennsylvania Dutch home, we always had white bread, butter, and grape jelly at the dinner all the time, right? All the time.
That was my hobby.
Yes. My dad would always
jelly bread.
Yes, always have the grape jelly bread. Now, my parents have broken that habit. Like my mom has broken my dad of that habit. But yeah, so it's more of just that.
You know, I always thought it was just him that did
Oh,
that.
no.
But I hear more and more people say that their grandparents did this. And I'm like, oh my God.
Yes. Yeah. And dipping your toast in orange juice. Like, I don't know, just crazy stuff, right? So yeah, this is more of just a slow process and you're going to savor it and you're really going to enjoy it. So then you just cover it up and you do this every 45 minutes or so. And 3 hours is good. Like you'll be able to do that when you go home tonight. I'll show you the rest of the steps and you'll be able to do those when you get home. I have let it go for 5 hours at the most. I have done it overnight and it just gets, I feel like it gets a thinner consistency. I don't get that rise. Whereas you'll have some artesian sourdough bread makers that'll let their dough ferment for 18 hours. They'll let it go for 18 hours. It's attracting the wild yeasts and the bacteria in the air. So, but again, that's a whole nother art and practice. So maybe you'll be that person and you'll get really good at this, you know. For us, like 3 hours, 4 hours is good. That's enough slowness for us, you know. So I'm just gonna tap that off and I'm gonna wash my hands and then we'll talk about the next steps, right? I have some spreads here too. This is a Pinot Grigio and fig cheese spread. So you can put that on your sourdough. There's a goat cheese with some essential oil infused honey that you can spread on there. And then, yeah, I mean, there's a Merlot hard cheese too. So go ahead and experiment, taste the bread. Okay, so you have covered your starter, so you know what to do with that when you get home. Okay.
When we get home, just put it in the fridge.
Yep,
Right?
just put it in the fridge. Yeah, because that'll give you time to find rye flour, because I doubt you're going to be baking tomorrow. Tomorrow's Wednesday, right? You'll have the whole week to find rye flour. And you can get, a pound of it ground. Like I said, I get 5 pounds, and it fits in, I would say 2 jars, like maybe one of these pickle jars and then some.
Yeah, because this is 10 pounds. So
Yeah.
it would be like half of that.
Yeah, maybe half of that.
So.
Yeah. So your next step, when you get home, that'll be you're going to probably get home around 9:30ish. You'll be able to do this. It doesn't take too long. I like to do this before bed because then I can put my bowl of dough in the fridge. This will be your next step. So I have a double loaf here. Like I have a double batch. So I'll show you what I do here. Okay, so I put some flour on. I have an enamel table in my kitchen and I like to work on that surface. Do you have something like that, or like a marble? Okay. You can use, sometimes I'll use this.
Can I use my countertop, my linoleum, or,
You can.
Okay.
You can. I feel like this wooden surface or something like marble or enamel is just easier to work the dough. I feel like with like a linoleum counter, is that what it is? It sometimes sticks more. So you might and get stuck in like the cracks and crevices. So you just want to flour a little bit more,
Yeah. And
So-
if we would use a cutting board like that, just put flour
Yep.
down and
Yeah. I feel like
might use that.
like wood, it doesn't stick as much to wood, kind of like when you're rolling out cookies. You ever like roll out Christmas cookies? I feel like I like to roll on
That never
wood.
worked for me.
Oh, it's so fun doing it with kids. Yeah. We don't really eat a whole lot of cookies, but I still do it because it's just tradition, Okay, so I like to flour my hands and I just scrape it out of the bowl. And remember, it's just like one piece that it just scrapes. So you don't like grab it and pull it in pieces. Or try not to. Like from here, I'll just kind of scrape as much as I can. It's just hard to get it all those little pieces. There. And now from here, I'm gonna put this bowl down on the ground. You have this scraper, plastic scraper. I love a pastry scraper, these metal ones. Those are good for kind of rounding out the bowl and really scraping the bowl, like getting all that dough out. But I like this because this is going to help you. It's going to be like your Captain Hook, kind of like just your extra limb. So I take that flour that's on my...
I think there's some paper there.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Huh. I don't know where that came from.
Who knows?
Well, we're just going to put it over here. Okay. All right. See how it's kind of sticking? I just like to put flour around the outside, work it underneath. Obviously, this is a smaller surface to work on. So this is a double recipe, remember? Yours is single, so you won't have to split yours in half. But that's just that's why I like this. Okay. So I'm gonna let this off to the side, and I'm gonna work this one. So it's already kind of shaped in that shape, right? But this is where you get your flour and you start pulling. Like, see how it's still keeping the shape. You'll see kind of the bubbles, but you just pull it inwards. And I just pull and tuck, pull and tuck. It's kind of like folding it over, right? Now, when my cousin was teaching me, it was really like this watery, it was just like just going all over the counter. I'm like, what? This is not even like a ball of dough. Like, how am I going to do anything with this? And it was like, you just keep folding it and folding it. And it was just like taking forever. So, I mean, you can do that. And that is the traditional way. It just takes a really long time. So I'm still folding, but it's not as thin as what, some people work with. And so see how it's starting to come together right here, right? So there, I'm gonna just kind of roll it back. And now it's gonna start to form that ball. It's gonna get tighter and tighter. So from here, see how you have that? It's like more of a ball than that, right?
Right.
Because you've worked it into that ball, and it's gonna start to form, and you just kind of lightly use your hands and work it. From there, you have your other tools, which is your proofing basket, which you all have, and I washed these liners for you so they're ready to go. Because when you're getting something from commercial, I just like them washed. So I have mine floured already because I've been using it, but normally every time I'm done with it, I'll rinse it out in hot water and I don't put it in the washing machine. I just rinse it in good hot water, hang it on the line, and then, ready to go. So I just flour it. I take my dough ball here and just tuck it in its little nest like that, right? And then I take my towel. This is what you're gonna do tonight. And you're gonna cover it up and you're gonna put it in the fridge. You're gonna put it to bed.
Okay,
right?
that's what we're gonna do tonight when we
That's
get
what
home.
you're gonna do tonight when you get home.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. So I'm gonna show you this again. And then Kate, if you wanna do this, you can. Okay? So just kind of get all that flour underneath there. I'm gonna sprinkle a little bit again on top. Okay? You're just gonna get that feel for it. It's not sticky anymore. I mean, you're gonna get some sticky parts because this has flour on it, right? But it has that you push it and it kind of feels like my belly. what my kids would say. And it's not sticking to my fingers, but it just has that. Yeah, I know. But you're just gonna keep working it to the center, okay? And then as you're working it to the center, it's gonna start to form that ball, and then you can kind of start to move it into that ball. And don't, like, you can like pull it and punch it into the center if you want to. Like, that's usually what I do. And just, yep, mm-hmm.
Should I be turning it each time?
You can, yeah, mm-hmm, yep. Whatever's easier, yeah. Yeah, you got it. And now from there, see, it's starting, do you start to see it?
Yes.
So now from here, that's where I just kind of start to roll it back, and then start to tuck some more flour underneath. And I might even, just for this guy, he has a little. So right here, see how beautiful that is? I would put it in my thing, and I'm going to. Actually, I'm going to show you a makeshift basket. We're going to do this. So, and then I'll let you guys wash your hands. So you can thrift some baskets. You can use old Crocs, I mean, whatever, and you can line them with, again, this muslin. So, do I have a piece? Yeah, I do. Okay. So you can line it. I'm just going to leave this here like this with some muslin. So this is like a really inexpensive way to make your sourdough. You don't need a whole lot of like crazy tools, right? You don't have to order extra these baskets. I think those baskets, they can be from $12 to $20. You know, you can get some, are they like paper mache ones? Not paper mache. They're more like a clay, I think. Those are a little more expensive. I think they're like $50. But those, you don't use a liner. You're gonna get that like, so if you take this off, you don't have to use a liner. You can flour this really well and then put your dough in there to get all the really cool designs if you want to, like the round design. I did that. I prefer the liner. I was like, oh, I want those cool designs. But I find that the flour just gets stuck in there, it gets moldy, and it's no bueno. So, okay. So now I'm gonna do this, tuck that baby in there, and then again, I would put some tea towel on there. Okay, now the final stage. This is fun. This is like, I think my favorite part. Love it. So now tomorrow morning, when you take your bread out of the refrigerator, I preheat my oven to 500. Okay. 500. Get her cranked. Yep. You want it good and hot. So that way it starts to create that outer layer, that outer crust.
Okay.
It rises it quick, but then I drop my temperature back to like 450, 400 after about 15 minutes. So I don't keep it at 500 for that long. So think about like an artesian bread maker in like the hills of, I don't know. Italy, yeah. I just think of like these beautiful European countries that are making like beautiful sourdough bread in like a brick oven. Like they get that oven cranked, right? It's hot. And so we're just gonna, replicate that. So I get it at 500. I preheat it to 500 and I start to prepare my skillet. So I will use parchment paper. I just like the non-bleached stuff. If you do get bleached, it's fine too. I've used that as well. I tear a piece off. Now I'm reusing this one. So I like to reuse it twice because it's still good to go. So you can do it two ways. You can lay that parchment paper out here and then kind of transfer if you want. So that's probably what I'll do. Yeah, that's what I'll do. You can use a Dutch oven if you want to. I go back and forth. I just kind of go with my skillet. I feel like it gives it a good crust on the outside. Sometimes humidity in your stove will hinder the rise. If it's too moist, it might not rise as well. So what I do instead is I take this little cast iron. Can you tell I love cast iron? I just do. I put some water in this and I put it in my oven the same time I put this in. So it adds some humidity to the oven as my bread is baking, but I'm still getting that crust on the outside of my loaf. So if I did it in a Dutch oven, I find that it doesn't rise as well and it doesn't get that crust on the top until the end, if that makes sense. So you can play around with it depending on what you like, and maybe your oven is different than mine and you find what you like. So as this is preheating, I don't pull this out right away. I give it some time. You know, I'll pull it out kind of right as this is done preheating, as my oven's done preheating. And what I do is, because I still like this nice and cold, because then you can score it. So let me talk about scoring first. So you have what's called a, what's it called? A lathe? I don't even know the technical term. It's a razor. That's pretty much what it is. A lame. See? A lame. That's what it's called. A lame. A horse is lame. So this is this is what you use to score. I have one, but guess what I love using the most? A simple razor. I've cut myself a few times on this, but I just get a bunch of razors. They're a lot cheaper. That one came with, it came with your whole little set there. I just feel like I can get a better handle on quickly slashing the bread.
Okay.
That is, it takes a little bit of time. I mean, I've used razors, like actual razors, you know, like that I would cut cardboard with. Use what you have. But you have the appropriate tool. So I flip it gently, okay? And then I'll score it. So scoring it, you get to add the fun patterns to it, but the reason behind it is that if you don't score it, your bread will bust open somewhere. So if you see, I scored this, but it's still kind of busted out on the bottom a little bit, you know, kind of cracked. You'll have that, but this just helps release that pressure of your bread baking. So you can do anything you want. You can look up different styles of like flowers and all kinds of intricate things, and people make pumpkins and all kinds of things. I usually just either go like do a quilter's, I don't know, like a tic-tac-toe board, I guess. You know, I can do a tic-tac-toe board and put a little X in the middle, or I'll just do a moon and then a wheat. I'll show you what a wheat is. So if you want to come behind me, that way you can see how I do this. So I'll just score it like that. And then the wheat, I just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that. I'll turn it and do one at the top and just score it like that. And then it'll like either make a pretty flower or not. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. Transfer that in and throw it in my hot oven. So my oven's hot right now. I'm gonna take it in and do that right now. And so 15 minutes at about 500 degrees and then drop it down for the last 15 minutes. Technically, like if you can see here, this is I slashed it, like you'll see the wheat flour there, and there's my little, I don't know, moon shape thing. So some artesian bread makers will let this get really, really dark, like a mahogany. Like you can let this go as dark as you want to. I just find it's really hard to cut through then. Mm-hmm. So I like this more like the amber color. As you can see, this is kind of a little bit lighter. So you can let it go as dark as you want to.
Use a pan that is smaller in diameter than the
Mm-hmm. You can, yeah. I do have smaller ones than this. Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, you know, I'll just, if my parchment paper is way over the top. Just because it is in such a hot oven, I like to tear off the edges. Just, it's still paper in a hot oven,
Okay,
Yeah.
so what do I do? I don't have any of this at home.
Oh, okay.
So if I'm going to bake tomorrow morning,
Mm-hmm.
can I just use like
Yeah, let me...
sheet or baking
Yes.
pan?
Yes, let me address it. Let me go put this in the oven real quick. That's a great question. Yes, great question. Do you have a cookie stone or like a Pampered Chef stone? Okay, you can definitely do it on a baking sheet. You can do it in I'm just thinking like a glass Pyrex might be a little too hot. I guess not.
Okay.
Just make sure your glass isn't cold when you put it in a hot oven. Yes, but try it on a cookie sheet first. Yeah. I'm just thinking if you don't have those sides though to keep it in like a formed pan. Try it, experiment with it.
Okay.
Lodge cast iron you can pick up at TJ Maxx. You can get them on Amazon. Really cheap. I think maybe like
A cast iron?
like $12. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, try it on a cookie sheet. I know people that throw it on like a stone, like a pizza stone.
Yeah.
It'd be the same thing. Yeah.
I
Absolutely.
used to have one, but it's gone.
Yeah. And those things crack. Like pizza stones. You'd have to be careful of that though. So if you're just doing it on a cookie sheet, I think you'll be fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Just do the same thing with the parchment.
Can I take
Yeah.
a parchment piece of
Oh
parchment?
yeah, absolutely. Hmm.
Just
Yeah.
for tomorrow.
Oh sure.
And then,
There you go.
thank you.
You're welcome. Do you need a piece? Do you have?
I'm good there.
Okay.
But I do have a question. The stoneware, like Pampered Chef stoneware, I do have one of those. Do you need to be careful with temperature for that? Should it be lower, or can we just go with the 500 and 450?
You would probably want to bring that up to temperature. If you have a stone, so put it in your oven and bring it up to temperature as the oven preheats. And then when you pull it out, put your dough on there, score it, and add it back in. So it's not like a shock of temperatures,
Okay.
Is that what you do with do you preheat the skillet?
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I find that when I preheat the skillet, sometimes the bottom gets done faster and gets sometimes it could burn on the bottom and it gets really crunchy. So, yeah. That's another experiment that I've experimented with. I prefer not preheating it or just maybe warming it, not a super hot temperature. Yeah. But with the stone, you might want to do that just so you don't have that shock of temperature. And maybe
Cast iron too, and
Okay.
they're about the same size.
Yeah.
They're both smaller than that, but they're pretty good size. So maybe I'll
Okay.
just go with the cast iron. But in case if I ever, for
Yeah.
some reason, want to try the stone.
Yeah, and when I bake, because I make 2 loaves at a time, and so I have 2 cast irons going at the same time. Where I have a friend that she bakes, and she said, and she experiments too, and she's like, I don't know, I find that when I bake 1 loaf at a time, I get a better rise because it's one even heat.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have 2 separate loaves, you're fighting for the hot temperature for both of those loaves. So again, that's another experiment with your oven and what works and what doesn't work. And so maybe experimenting with the stone and then experimenting with, or do one in the stone and one in the cast iron if you do a double loaf. Yeah. And don't find it I know, you can have a seat. We'll just kind of have a chat about questions and some things. But I remember my beginning days of making sourdough. I'm like, why isn't this working? And I'm like punching the dough and I'm seriously taking my anger out on this dough. And I was listening to a podcast today and the guy goes, if the dough's not working and it's not doing what you want it to do, it's not the dough, it's you. And I'm going, oh man, you're not doing something right. I'm going, oh man, that's so true. I was not whatever, I didn't add enough flour, or I was just being impatient and not giving it love and thinking about it as like a therapeutic form of, just cooking in the kitchen, and I was just rushing. And when, I don't know, like my husband always says, this was not made with love, or this was made with love. I can taste it. When you're rushing in the kitchen, your love is not going into it. And so just think about that as you're going about, making your bread, and don't get frustrated. Just think about like you're learning this, you're experimenting with this. You have a good recipe to go home with. You have the hands-on knowledge. You have me to ask questions if something's not working. And just remember that dough is a one unit. Just keep turning it as like one whole piece, not like I feel like we're used to just kneading dough, or we're just punching it, but it's more of a delicate process, So your next step now is, it's been about a good half hour, 45 minutes, is to add the salt. Okay, I've forgotten salt, and bread without salt is pretty bland. You could add too much salt where it affects your rise. So I just do a nice sprinkle on top, about a teaspoon, half a teaspoon to a teaspoon.
So I'm adding salt tomorrow.
Right now. We're going to add it right now.
Oh,
Yep.
Okay.
Gonna get those hands dirty again. Yeah. So what is let me see your recipe. Here it is.
Like how much salt?
Okay. I usually just, this is where I don't measure. Just thinking. So I would say that would be a half a teaspoon. Would you say? About a half a teaspoon? Yeah.
Now, would that be for the single batch or the double batch?
That would be for the double batch. So you would do a quarter teaspoon. So go ahead and write a quarter teaspoon down. And again, you can adjust that if you've tasted it and you're like, yeah, this needs a little more salt. You can add some more salt. Technically, if you weigh salt can weigh different weights. Like this is heavier than, say, your iodized table salt because this has more minerals in it. So that's where, when you're measuring, like 1 teaspoon of this salt to 1 teaspoon of iodized salt is completely different in weight, because it's a completely different salt.
And that is sea salt?
This is called real salt.
Oh.
I get it in bulk.
At Mass.
At Mast. Or Martin's in Ephrata. Any
Okay.
family-owned market should have like Himalayan sea salt or real salt or Celtic sea salt. I just use that rather than regular table salt, because when you're fermenting anything, you don't want to use anything that has, iodine added to it or any other chemicals that are added to it, because it's going to kill the ferment. So you need a real salt.
Mm-hmm.
So we've done research on salt. Brooke got on this salt kick, and he was like, I cannot believe you're buying this pink Himalayan sea salt. And I was like, okay, so we were researching all these salts, right? And so real salt is one of the best quality salts out there, because it has all minerals intact. It's mined, from a salt mine. Nothing's added to it. So you do research and see what works for you, but we're gonna add some salt right now. So you can take your covers off of your dough, quarter teaspoon, sprinkle it on top. So now you take your hands and you are going to, you could even, if you wanted to, you can use that scraper and scrape it. I just feel like using your hands, you get the feel of the dough, because every time you do this, every 45 minutes, I feel like the texture of the dough is changing. It's becoming more of that soft Pillsbury doughboy, So just, you're going to take it and you're going to fold it over. Fold it over. Yep. Now turn the bowl. Yep. And fold it. Just like that. Just like you were doing it on this board here. You're just... And it's okay. It's going to be goopy and messy. And that's good. That's it. I do 4 folds.
Okay.
And that's good. Fold, fold. I try to do fold towards me, and then I turn the bowl. fold towards me, turn the bowl, fold towards me. So it's like 4 times you're folding it on top of each other, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So if you want to try that, you can. So like, so just, yep, fold towards you, turn the bowl, fold towards you. Yes, like that. Yep, you got it. Yep. So that's it. And then you can just and then go wash your hands, put your cover back on, and then you'll do this. Now, when you go home, you're not necessarily going to do this because you're going to probably do that process. Well, I mean, it's 8 o'clock. We're almost done. So when you get home, you can do that fold one more time. You don't have to add salt that time. Just do the fold. And then I would say around 9 o'clock is 9:30 is probably when you can start to fold it up and put it in your basket.
And then it goes in the fridge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you're up till 10 o'clock tonight, you can wait longer. When you get home, you can kind of do that fold that I showed you in the bowl.
Yeah.
So write that down on your notes of when you get home. You can write it on the back. And then in about a half hour to an hour. Then you'll wait a half hour to a half hour, depending how long you stay up. Then you're going to put it out on your kitchen counter on some flour, and that's when you're going to work it corner to corner into the center. Just remember, corners into the center. Tuck the corners. Yep, just keep tucking
are
them.
we using this thing then to scrape
Yes.
like you did with that? Okay.
Yeah, it's just easier. I mean, just to get it into just to get that flour underneath and to shape it into somewhat of a ball.
Yeah.
And then you can start pulling and tucking, and you're going to see it starting to shape up and become tighter. And then that's when, if you can't tuck anymore, that's when you take your hands and just kind of roll it real gently, and then take this and scoop it up, tip it over, and put it in your proofing basket, your floured proofing basket. I've done it where I haven't tucked it at all because I was watching videos where, these bakers, they plop their dough out and it comes out beautifully and nothing sticks to the bowl, and they just kind of section it off and go poop, 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 and then plop it in, boop, 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 plop it in. I'm going, oh, that's so much easier. I did that, but then I did not get a rise at all. It just went bloop. And so I found the technique of just folding it in, folding it in, folding it in. I've gone too far where I'm just like, why isn't this folding? And why it's not forming any shape? And and for me, I think that's where it comes back to the basis of the dough. Did I not add enough flour? Is the dough too wet? So if you're working it and it just doesn't seem to hold shape, for me, I've found that that's where, okay, next time I make my dough, I have to add a little bit more flour so that it gets tighter. Because if it's too wet, it's just going to continue to form to the counter,
Yeah.
Yeah. So then you're just going to have to add more flour. As you're folding, just continue to add more flour, just so it becomes workable, shapeable. Yeah. That makes sense. But I think what you have there is good. Yeah. It's definitely a more gentle process of folding, and because then you felt it. It's more of a delicate dough too. It's not that tough bread dough or pizza dough, And the other thing I wanted to share with you too, people talk about the crumb. So this is a flatter bread. There's some small holes in there, not a whole lot. When you get a really good sourdough, like bubbly sourdough, and you catch it and you make your dough from that bubbly sourdough starter, you will. And the way that you also, a lot of things factor in there. But when you cut that open, and I'm going to cut it open now, you should see more of a holier dough, I guess, a holier bread. That's the crumb. So I'm just going to cut this in half. And you want to really let this rest for a good like half a day until this is really cool. I know we're so tempted to just like, I'm going to cut this open and eat it. It's like, you know, and we've done that, you know, but you're going to find that it's really goopy and doughy inside. It's going to stick to your knife. So, okay. So see, you have, it's just a higher rise. You have more of like the holes. So some artesian bread makers will definitely have more of like the nooks and crannies of like the English muffins, you know, and you'll see a lot bigger bubbles. But here, I mean, you're getting more bubbles than you would and air pockets that you would here, I guess you could say. So, yeah. That's the goal. You don't want like super air pockets in there, but you want a few, you know, just be lighter. So yeah, after you take this out of the oven, I mean, it's 30 minutes, longer if you want that mahogany dark color on the top of your dough. Let it sit for a good half a day till it's really cool. I mean, sometimes I let it go a whole day on the counter and let it get that real good crust on the top too. And then I'll cut it open the next day because it's nice and cool. Like I said, if I would have cut this open right after the oven or even an hour after, it's still warm in there and it's going to leave like that. And you're trying to cut it and it's just going to leave that film on your knife. And it's just, yeah. And we've done it. I mean, we've eaten it warm and it's yummy warm, but yeah.